character education is about the breadth of education. It's about developing young people that are ready for a world beyond school. And I think there's been a general understanding that in this ever more standards-driven education system that we have in the UK, testing, whether we're looking at progress 8 or 5 A's to C's at GCSE as it used to be, or whatever, as a sort of a measure of what pupils can achieve. Many schools have felt that they've had to let other things go.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator, specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm in conversation with Louise Simpson, who is Head of Exeter School. So Louise joined Exeter School as head in September 2020, and prior for that, for 6 years, she's been head of St. Paul's School in São Paulo, Brazil. Prior to that, here back in the UK, she was head of Bromley High School, a GDST school for girls, for 4 years or so before moving over to Brazil. Exeter School, where Louise now is head, is a co-educational independent day school. So they have just under 1,000 girls and boys aged 11 to 18. And just recently, earlier in 2021, they have announced that they're joining forces with the new school, which is a local pre-prep. So they're now able to offer an education all the way through from ages 3 to 18. So Louise and I have a wide-ranging conversation in this episode, covering things from how to be more intentionally international and her perspective on moving back into the UK independent school sector, having been abroad for that period of time in Brazil. The role of character education as well. She's actually doing an MA specifically focusing in character education, so hearing her views on that are really interesting. We also covered the importance of diversity inclusion, the importance of collaborative leadership, and some of the challenges that we've been facing in this last period of time during the pandemic. Really quickly, before we dive into the detail, I want to make sure that you make the most of the time you invest listening to this podcast. And the best way to do that is to make sure you grab a copy of my free ebook, The Strategic Independent School Leader. It outlines how to answer the 6 essential questions that will clarify your school strategy and secure its future. In the world of business, strategy can be full of jargon, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is a jargon-free tool tailor-made to help private school leaders think and act more strategically. Download your free copy today at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/ebook. So please do sit back and enjoy the episode and my conversation with Louise Simpson. Hello, Louise, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast.
Hello, Juliette. How are you?
I'm very well. It is wonderful to have you join us here today. Now, I want to start by asking a little bit about why you got into education. You've been a teacher for a number of years now, pretty much since you left university, I think, if I'm right in thinking. So what was it about education that kind of sparked your interest initially? What gave you that passion for staying in this sector?
Well, I think I was quite a reluctant teacher to start with. My father was a teacher and was quite unhappy in his career. And so I sort of saw teaching as something that I wanted to avoid, not quite like the plague, but, to some degree, it certainly wasn't on my list of things to do. And I ended up falling into a job. I was kind of between things. I'd just finished at university. I'd done a post-grad thing, and I'd been in Ireland, and I'd done a few things, and I was ready actually to go and explore and spend some time in New Zealand, and so I was staying with my parents who live in Suffolk, and this job kind of hinted itself at me as an assistant at Gresham School in Norfolk, and I thought, well, I can do that until I go to New Zealand. That would be good. I'll go and do that for 6 months, and then I'll get on a plane and go to the other side of the world. And I was completely hooked. I spent 4 years there. I did my PGCE. I qualified as a teacher, and I sort of came in by the back door, and I fell in love with all that a brilliant independent education can offer, because it was very different to the one that I had, and it opened my eyes to what a wonderful all-rounded education you can get in a school like this one. It's very similar in lots of ways to the one I'm in at the moment, Gresham's. Yeah. So.
Interesting. Actually, my journey was quite similar. My parents were both in education, one at higher education, one further education, and I saw them working so incredibly hard. And their advice to us with children was, you can do anything. The world is your oyster. But if you teach, it's a lot of hard work. And actually, interestingly, of me and my siblings, so I'm not a teacher, but I've worked in education all my career in kind of marketing, fundraising, strategy. And my brother is now a teacher. And both of us have this passion for education that I think is almost inherited from them, despite seeing all of the hard work that they put in.
Absolutely. And I think I fell in love with the broader idea of education. I think when I was in school, I went to a state comprehensive school, and we didn't have the same opportunities that you have in an independent school, and then I discovered this world where school was your life, and it offered you the opportunity to learn to dive, to jump out of aeroplanes, to learn leadership skills in the CCF, to be able to sing, like an angel, and all these things that had just not been possible for me. And I realised, I think then, what education really means. It's not about getting qualifications necessarily. It's about many other things. So that's when I really fell in love with education. And I've not looked back. I've loved every single minute of my career, even the challenging ones.
We might touch on those in a few minutes. But that career has spanned geographically quite a distance as well. So you've obviously returned relatively recently, kind of during the pandemic, September 2020, from being head of St. Paul's School in São Paulo in Brazil. What was that transition like, coming back from being overseas back to the UK? Did it give you a different perspective on the education?
Yeah, definitely. I think the independent school international world used to be somewhere that people went to go and hide from things, and you had to be pretty brave to take an overseas posting. And some of the people who did that were quite maverick, and it was quite an interesting world. I think quite colourful, and it still is actually very colourful, but now incredibly innovative. The school that I was ahead of is an amazing school, really exciting. It's got phenomenal ambition, and it's a phenomenal school. And you learn so much when you're in a world that's kind of touching on British education, but that's just a very small part of it. So I learned a huge amount as an educator. Brazil is a phenomenal place. Coming back in the middle of a pandemic was probably not a very sensible decision on my part, but we survived, and that posed a few quite specific issues, I suppose. But I don't regret it in any way at all. I learned so much in Brazil. It was absolutely incredible, and I think everyone should work overseas. I think it really puts you out of your comfort zone. You learn a lot about culture, about the importance of nuance and communication, which when it's your own language and you understand everything, it just is just another world. It's very difficult when you're in a world that's just subtly different in lots of ways. And I absolutely loved it. I had a great time there, worked with some phenomenal people, and I learned a huge amount. So I think what Exeter wanted for me when they appointed me was a slightly more world view. Devon is not always the most forward-thinking. You're local.
I am, yes.
The most forward-thinking place in every sense. And we wanted to look outwards a bit more as a school. And I think my experience overseas was something that perhaps would allow us to do that a bit more.
Yeah, I think your advice to spend some time overseas at some point in your career is really sound advice. I worked in an Australian school, and even though the language was the same to all intents and purposes, different kind of turn of phrase, but there was so much cultural nuance that I was much more alert to, and came back to the UK just with my eyes open a bit wider, looking for culture differences between different organizations, between different subgroups within organizations, sort of little mini kind of cultural bubbles that you can get within schools, and I think that it does give you a perspective of I don't know, I'm sure you can do it other ways too, but you're more likely to come back and say, why are we doing it this way still? I'm sure there are other ways you could spark the same kind of curiosity, but I think that's one really sound way of doing it.
Absolutely. And I think when you're in a place where for me, the language, I'm not a linguist at all. And I did my best and learned some Portuguese, but, I'm not very good at it. And you don't realize just how much is unsaid in what you're saying until people don't understand you. And that I think was quite an eye-opener. We had to think so hard about how we communicated in a way that just you don't have to hear. Everyone just understands what you mean and what the context is. And so that, you're engaging with your community when their first language is not your own, it is quite challenging. And as an educator, that adds another layer, I think, because you're educating parents as well as the children. That can be challenging.
Yeah, but sometimes when you're having to explain something in more detail, it forces you to understand. Okay, so yes, why are we doing it this way? What does this turn of phrase actually mean to people? What are our core purpose that we're trying to achieve in undertaking a particular kind of project, whatever it might be? You actually have forced to think those things through, maybe a little more.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
The other thing I wonder about the international school sector, we often hear British schools here based in the UK talking about wanting to be more outward facing, more globally engaged. And I wondered whether, as a British school overseas, whether that happens automatically or whether it's still something that you worked on within.
Oh, that's a good question, actually, because what you find in most British schools overseas is that they're not very international. They become, it depends where you are in the world, but generally speaking, British international schools are not peopled by expats anymore, and many school populations are becoming more and more local. And that was certainly the case in my school. The vast majority of our pupils were Brazilian, and they were from the Brazilian elite, parents who could afford the fees. And, it was a very specific set of society. And actually they were buying into what they thought was very international education, but really it was a local education with an international curriculum. So that's a little bit different, I think. And so therefore you do have to be intentionally international.
Yes.
And so things like the International Baccalaureate qualification, which many British international schools offer, is one way of doing that. That that requires you to be globally minded, and as a result, you become a lot more globally minded because the curriculum drives so many other things about what you do at school. And actually, today I was talking with a former colleague of mine who used to be the director of the Taipei European School in Taiwan, which has got a German, a French, and an English curriculum section. And he was reflecting on how parents often chose that school because it had multidimensional culture within the school, because you had three curriculums that were sort of interrelating with each other, which is it's a very unusual model, but quite an interesting one. That you, for the Taiwanese children who went there, they didn't just have one international culture embedded in their school; they had three,
yes,
plus their own Taiwanese identity. So quite interesting. But no, I think the IB does help significantly. It requires international mindedness and international global thinking in a way that A levels really doesn't, or really don't, rather. And so back in the UK, you have to be a bit more intentional about it, I think, because so many of us don't offer the IB here.
Yeah, I love that phrase that you had, kind of intentionally international. I think that intentionality is a key part of being strategic. It's actually thinking through, okay, so what's going to happen automatically because we are the type of school we are, and what do we have to put in place to actually fill those gaps? And if one of those gaps is we want our school to be more outward looking, more globally engaged, being intentional about it. Okay, so what projects are you going to put in place to really achieve that, and putting the budget and the resource behind that to make sure that it can be a central part of what you're doing is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you returned to the UK September, well, I imagine you returned before, but started your post at Exeter School 2020 in September. I imagine that was one of the challenging moments that you alluded to earlier in our conversation. Talk about in at the deep end. How have things changed over the last year compared to education as you saw it in the UK before you left for Brazil?
Well, there's been a huge change, actually. I mean, I was only in Brazil for 6 years, but in that time, the GCSE curricula have gone to grades 1 to 9, for example. There's been quite a lot of curriculum and assessment change. We've gone to linear A levels from modular A levels, so there's been, on the academic curriculum side, there's been quite big shifts. And it's funny, I sometimes people here talking about things that just make absolute sense to them. And I'm saying, hold on, can I just check? When did that happen? Oh, 2017. Okay, right.
Yes.
So I wasn't here then. I need to just check up on that. There's been some big changes in things like keeping children safe in education and safeguarding, and all very, very, very correctly focus on welfare and safeguarding and mental health. That's changed significantly, I would say, in the 6 years I've been away. But I think fundamentally what's important about giving pupils a great all-rounded education hasn't changed since I first went to Gresham's in 1992. Those things have been absolutely the same, and that's what makes great schools continue to offer a great education. And I think probably in the last 6 years or so, there's been more of a divergence between what we as independent schools can do and what the state sector has the capacity to do in terms of all those enrichment activities and the extras that aren't necessarily very available in some schools. And as a result, I think perhaps more of a focus on them in schools like mine, where we really think that that's an integral part of education. It's not something that sits on top. It's very much part of the core of what we believe is important.
And that comes back to your answer very early in this conversation about the breadth of the education, that you were suddenly aware of what was possible within education. It's not all about academic kind of progress and qualifications. And you're doing an MA focusing on character education. Is this kind of sparked from this passion for the breadth of the education? And what is it about an independent education that we are able to do in this sector really well because we have that extra resource per pupil?
Yeah, my MA, I absolutely love doing it, and lots of people have thought I'm slightly crazy to try and do an MA while you're ahead, and I would agree. I think that's just slightly foolhardy when I think about it, but it's utterly fascinating, and it's, I mean, character education is about the breadth of education. It's about developing young people that are ready for a world beyond school. And I think there's been a general understanding that in this ever more standards-driven education system that we have in the UK, testing, whether we're looking at progress 8 or 5 A's to C's at GCSE as it used to be, or whatever, as a sort of a measure of what pupils can achieve. Many schools, and not all of them in the state sector, but many schools have felt that they've had to let other things go. So if you look at, for example, the amount of music education that exists in many schools these days, it's got thinner and thinner and thinner. How many children are still studying a language, a foreign language, beyond the age of 13 nationally? It's shocking, actually. And having worked in a school where the vast majority of my children were not only bilingual but often trilingual as well, I really, really value language. I think it's a phenomenally important thing. and that's kind of where I think my interest in character education has come from. This intentional, back to that word intentional, the intentional aim to try and do more than just put children through exams, and actually there are lots of empirical evidence that suggests that if pupils have high quality character education in their schools, if they're supported to be more resilient and to be morally good, and to understand about what virtues are, and how to be a good person and how to contribute to society and be civically minded, actually that they academically they do better anyway. So it just makes sense for everyone to really believe in this. But I find finding it absolutely fascinating, and I can talk about it for hours, but I won't.
I'd love to hear you for hours.
Fascinating. But and it does come down to a broad range of good quality stuff outside the classroom, whether that's on the sports field, in the swimming pool, in the chapel, in the music rooms, on the hills, sailing boats, or making models, or whatever. Those are the things which are able to develop all those additional qualities in pupils, and help them then to start to have the skills that mean that they're going to be good quality citizens and be able to contribute to civic life when they're older, because after all, isn't that what school's all about?
Well, exactly. So you mentioned skills, though. I think there's also a really massive piece of this, which is helping our children to be aware of themselves and kind of self-discovery skills. So when they leave school, when they leave university, when they rethink their career midway through their life, whatever stage it is, giving them the skills and tools to actually reflect on who am I, what are my strengths, what do I love, what brings me joy, helping people to understand how they might be able to contribute to society and how they define success as well, and to what extent that means following a more traditional career path, or what extent they're willing to go off the beaten track and create their own form of success. But that process of self-discovery, and it's not just helping children discover themselves at that moment you're teaching them, but it's giving them the skills to use through the rest of their life to be just self-aware of what is my place in society, what is my role, what can I bring, what is my gift, basically, that I can really get joy from and help society through. If we can have children coming out of school and university with those skills, that's a game changer.
Absolutely. I mean, the course I'm doing, it really focuses on Aristotle and his theories of flourishing, and the concept of eudaimonia, which is this idea that your society is flourishing. Everyone makes their contribution, and sometimes that's hard. It's not just about having parties all the time and being happy. It's much more than that. It's fascinating to think about these concepts, and also to think about how old they are. Aristotle was working before Christ, thousands of years ago, and yet they're still totally pertinent, the things that he hypothesized and philosophized on. So it's fascinating stuff.
There's some root into the truth of being human there, isn't there? For an idea to have lasted that long. Fascinating. And the immediate question it almost instinctively brings to my mind is, if we as schools, independent schools, want to have children coming out into society, young people who are able to make a positive change on society, it also begs the question, what's the role of us as schools, as a sector, to actually also improve society, and the role of bursaries, state school partnerships. Obviously, we've seen a trend towards all of this, growing momentum over the last, 5-10 years. It seems to have picked up momentum even more during the pandemic. What is Exeter School's plans? What do you have in mind for where you're heading with regards to bursary, state school partnerships and diversity inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, we've had quite a theme on inclusion this year. It's been really rather wonderful. We started the new school year in September with our traditional speech day ceremony, which wasn't quite traditional because it was all done online, of course. But we invited Claire Harvey, a Paralympian, to come and be our guest of honour, and she got us thinking about inclusion and diversity in a way that I think the school hadn't really thought of before. I've worked with Claire a number of times, and she's quite an inspiring woman, and the pupils really loved working with her. It was really fantastic, and in fact, she's been back since and is already a friend of the school. So we're very happy about that. But one of the things that we are keen to do is become more accessible, and I mean that in every sense: financially accessible and physically accessible. To people who perhaps wouldn't normally consider us as a school. So, and part of that, of course, is extending partnership work with local primary schools, with local secondary schools as well. We have an 11 to 16 secondary system in Exeter, and so we're working on hopefully developing some specific bursaries and scholarships for pupils coming from specific schools. There's a multi-academy trust here, which we've already been working with, who's got some really interested heads who are keen to develop some partnerships with us. And we hope that will see us working with them. One of my deputy heads is going to be speaking at their conference I think it's in the autumn. So that's a really good opportunity. And he'll be taking some of our pupils along as well to engage with them. And we've got quite a lot of ideas that we'd like to be doing with them going forward. So there's a few nuggets of ideas. We're looking at a festival of education, which we would run with them as well. So lots of exciting things that we would like to do. We really firmly believe that partnership is really partnership. It's not outreach. It's not us doing things for people. It's us working together, and everyone benefits. It's a mutually beneficial process, not a one-way flow.
Yes, absolutely.
And certainly the local multi-academy trust are really fantastic. Actually, I'm visiting one of the schools next week and meeting with a head there to cement our partnership a little bit further. So lots of exciting things going on there. And on the bursary front, we have a bursary fund. My predecessor, Bob Griffin, put his name to a fund when he left school, and we're delighted that parents were so generous in supporting that, and that specifically is for bursary candidates. So we're doing our best to try and attract more bursary candidates, more applicants. We've got specific marketing campaigns for that. We've also put on new bus services, which will be starting in September, which we haven't had before, which hopefully will mean that we can get to parts of Devon that maybe parents haven't heard of Exeter School before, so that we can make it easier for their children to be a part of our school. So that's another intentional element of our partnership and extending ourselves out into the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that point about partnership being a partnership of equals is critically important, I think, and the sense that you're working alongside organisations where they are populated by people who have the same passion as we do for excellent education for as many young people as we can. And I think the reason I'm still working in this sector, the independent school sector, is because I believe that we have a momentum to make some really positive changes to open up excellent education to a much wider proportion of the society in which we live. And I think that work is intensifying, and I'm really pleased to see that across the sector.
Absolutely. I think it's our moral duty, apart from anything else. We've got a wonderful school that I want to share with as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
So just got to get out there and let them know that we're here. It's surprising. I mean, I don't know if you've seen our school, but it's a big building and it's got huge playing fields, and you can see it from miles around, but you'd be amazed at how many people don't know we're here. So there's quite a lot of work to do to just raise a bit of awareness.
Yeah, and sometimes even for schools with buildings that look as impressive as yours do as well, even if the local kind of community does know it's there, sometimes it can be a barrier to people just kind of popping in to use the sports centre or whatever it might be. It actually presents a bit of a facade of an old school, literally, way of thinking about kind of a them and us approach to community that in some cases I think those buildings actually are a barrier to bringing in the community in. They shouldn't be, they don't need to be, but it's something that you have to consciously overcome.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So we have gone through 16 months now of the most tumultuous time that certainly I think our generation have lived through. I wonder if you've reflected at all on whether your leadership style has been affected through this, whether there's anything that you've changed about the way that you communicate with the school community, or the way that you lead and kind of your team, your staff at the school?
That's an interesting question, and I think I would describe myself as quite a collaborative leader, and I think people who've worked with me would agree with that. I'm generally quite fast paced, and I think actually the pandemic's been really good. It's forced me to slow down, which I think has been really good for me. It's made me a bit more reflective and a bit more patient, perhaps. And I think, sadly, there have been some times in the last year where we've had to just make decisions that have not allowed us to be consultative, which is a bit against my general raison d'etre. Normally I would try to be consultative, and I would try to collaborate and be very sort of open about change, but we haven't always had time to do that this year, and I think that's felt a bit uncomfortable for me sometimes, felt a little bit inauthentic. My natural style is to be much more discursive, and we just, when you can't be in the same room as people, that just there's a bit more of a barrier when you're dealing with large quantities of people, a big school population. I think we've, more important than ever, the people have really risen when we think about leadership through this. It's not necessarily been about doing stuff or having stuff or setting up systems, whatever. It's been about making sure that people are happy and that they're okay, and accepting that sometimes people aren't that okay, and that's okay, actually, because it's been tough for everybody. So I think that the piece around about mental health and about valuing people and ensuring that people feel that their voice is considered, even if it hasn't been heard directly, I think has been really, really crucial in this last year. We actually made a decision to change our term dates, which is very un-Exeter School, because we like to plan things in advance. And we decided to, when we knew about lockdown around March time, we decided to change term dates to get an additional week of in situ learning. And that was really, thought through incredibly well, but we were able to engage with parents really positively on that, and that made me realise how important that consultation process and the value of community was at that time. So I think we've realised that we are all stakeholders, and we all need to listen to each other, and we all need to care for each other more than anything this year. And I think the pandemic has really focused on that and allowed us to crystallise those views.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about that is that, in fact, some of what you said is echoing the conversations we've had on this podcast with other heads of schools as well. So I remember a couple of episodes ago, Andrew Gordon Brown, who's head of Kingswood School, was talking about the fact that he likes to generally kind of distribute leadership as far and wide across the school as possible, but the pandemic had forced them to be a little bit more centralised about that decision making, because decisions had to be made really fast. They had to be made without a lot of consultation, often following very quickly changing guidelines coming in from the Department for Education. And so that was similar to your comment there about regretting the fact that normally that collaborative style that you would take kind of automatically isn't always possible when change is happening, is enforced upon you from outside, when this is kind of exogenous external shock that happens to your school. Sometimes things have to happen fast. We do often see in leadership, and the theory of leadership is often around distributed leadership is really effective in more predictable times, but there has to be an opportunity for centralized decision making when there is very fast-paced change, where a very quick kind of focused decision is needed. So that's really interesting. And also, previously, earlier in the year, we had Bart Villenga from Blundell's School, and he was talking about opening up conversations with parents in a much more authentic, kind of honest way, and that he'd found that had built a lot more trust. So sometimes during the last year, he would just say, I don't know, what's going to happen next. I don't know. I know what you know. We know what the government's saying. But sometimes just saying that is a much more authentic style of kind of open, authentic, honest leadership. And I think that's really important for building trust. And I think trust is a key element of leadership, especially when you're leading a community of stakeholders where although, yes, obviously you as head and the chair of governors and so on, everybody has this sense of who is actually in charge, but there is a sense of we are a community, we work together. And so trust is absolutely essential for that form of leadership, I think.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that the children are the most important thing. And sometimes that gets a bit forgotten when you're having to interpret whatever the latest diktat from government is. And so we've had to keep reminding ourselves of that, I think. And I've been amazed at how agile and how flexible people have been able to be. And that's really, really helped. It's meant that we can make decisions quickly. We can always have that, well-being of the children at the heart of the decision making, and we've been able to really focus on what matters. But it hasn't been easy. There's been times where it hasn't felt like a natural way of leading. It's just been what we've had to do.
Yeah, exactly. Forced to come upon us from the outside sometimes. So as we wrap up our conversation, Louise, I wonder if you would share with us your kind of optimistic hopes and dreams for the way the sector is going to be growing and unfolding over the next sort of 5-10 years. What are your thoughts on where we're heading as an independent school sector?
Wow. Well, always optimistic. So our glasses are always going to be at least half full, and if not overflowing. So that's where I start from. I think the sector offers such enormous variety. And I think going back to what I said earlier, we have the unique position, I suppose, to be able to form a curriculum and a provision and an offer for our pupils, which is far more than the tick box kind of accountability that I think we see ever more of in other sectors. And I think that for me is one of the reasons why I'm here, and because I feel that we've got freedom to do things. I'm quite excited actually that the pandemic has made a mess of GCSEs because I'm hoping that we're going to, as a sector, lead in whatever is going to hopefully take their place in the future. There's a lot of discussion, or has been a lot of discussion, about how appropriate our Key Stage 4 provision is for 15 and 16-year-olds, and whether there's a better way forward. And I loved being involved in the IB when I was in Brazil, and I really do think a baccalaureate style approach to whatever the GCSE reform leads to would be really exciting for young people. And so I think there are lots of opportunities there, and I think there's a lot more breadth of innovation and exciting ideas in this sector that we can tap into, not least from people who perhaps have worked outside the UK and seen it done differently, and seen it perhaps done very, very well in other parts of the world. So I think that's quite exciting. I think the more we get involved with the state sector and the more partnership work we do, the better for everybody. The idea of us trying to blur the lines a bit between us and them, if you like, I think is really positive. I think we should be seen as educators first and foremost, and interested in developing young people and giving them opportunities to go forward. And if we're well resourced to do that, then it's wonderful if we can share that with others. So for me, that's really key as well. And I'm sure we'll see. I'm very excited about the Eton and Star Academies Trust. Is it called Star Academies Trust? The multi-academy trust up in the north of England, with their sixth form enterprise. It looks really, really exciting, and that's what an amazing thing to be able to do when you're a school like Eton with the resources that they have. It's a phenomenal opportunity for those young people. So I think that's an area, continuing to do that, continuing to look at how we can learn from each other, and we can benefit the young people. That's the key thing for me.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with everything that you've just said there. Absolutely fantastic. Louise, thank you so much for joining us today. Loved your comments about being intentionally international, and the fact that word intentional came up through our conversation. I think that is about being strategic. It's about thinking through in advance where you're going to focus your scarce resources and where you think you can make the biggest difference. Fascinating to hear about your MA in character education and how that kind of informs everything we're doing across the independent school sector. Obviously, the importance of diversity inclusion, and then the impact on your kind of collaborative leadership style. Really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been lovely to talk to you, Juliet. Thank you.
Not a problem at all. Bye-bye, everybody, then. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.